So let's kick off by introducing the team. It's a very fine team today. Very excited. Um, let's kick off with Ben. Ben Chamberlain Ben's been around strategy execution for a long, long time. He's been on the vendor side. He's been a consultant. He's recently founded the Strategy Execution Forum, which is a community of strategy execution professionals crossing beyond PMO and into strategy and transformation leaders, architect, organizational architects, business architects, things like that. So everybody involved in strategy execution. Fadi Bayoud. Fadi is another Northerner, actually, based up in Canada, frozen Canada, hopefully thawing out a little bit at this point. And Fadi runs a consulting company called Strategic Anchors. And the idea there is to help large organizations actually execute their strategy more effectively. So really hands-on, lots of experience in large programs and change management and all those kind of things. And Rebecca Reynolds um, is a consultant who really spends her time in the boardroom. Mostly in government agencies in the US and some nonprofits. And Rebecca's here to really help us understand that boardroom view of change and transformation and why the strategy execution gap is so stubborn and why it's so frustrating and why they care. But also possibly figure out why things haven't been fixed, right? And make some observations about how to connect the boardroom to the engine that's actually delivering strategy. So thank you all for joining. Really, really excited. And what I'd love to start with, Ben, is we've been talking about the strategy execution gap for decades, right? You've personally been talking about it for 2.5, almost 3 decades, right? I'm not too far behind you, Rebecca. You're not too far behind that either.
Yeah.
So this is not a new problem. Why do you think we're still talking about this? Why is this still an issue?
That's a great question. Listen, I'm not sure everyone's been talking about it until, no, for the last 30 years. I think that obviously, as organizations, we've invested a lot over the last 30 years to try and solve this problem. So both process improvement and technology. I think really, from my standpoint, it's really been over the last 3, 4, 5 years that this is becoming a mainstream topic. If you go on LinkedIn and how do I bridge the gap between strategy execution and topics like that coming from various different functions and roles within the organization. It's one of the reasons I, as you say, founded the Strategy Execution Forum. So why do I think it's a challenge? I think there's many reasons why organizations, in essence, struggle to execute on their strategy and are hemorrhaging and losing business value. But I think it comes down to sort of 3 primary reasons. First, it starts at the C-suite level. I'm not sure that members of the C-suite first understand what strategy execution is, and certainly don't understand the impact of suboptimal strategy execution capabilities within their organization. And when I say impact, is that poor strategy execution capabilities is causing value loss and deferral, so delay of value. I think that comes down to the fact that often they may think of strategy execution more like program execution on steroids, and program management is not a perfect science. Therefore, some waste is expected in terms of value, right? So you can almost write that waste off as a cost of doing business, right? So if it's 5 to 10% of the value, okay, it's not. It's significantly more than that. It could be 30 to 50% of value being lost or deferred, delayed on a portfolio. The
Hang on,
second,
say that again, right? Because I want to make sure everybody understands what you just said. Those
so
numbers.
we can dive down later into some of the leading indicator metrics of value erosion. I won't do that now, but recently did some research on this, and based on what I classify as portfolio structural risk, which people know less about, and portfolio execution risk that people know more about, the value at risk for organizations with suboptimal strategy execution capabilities could be anywhere between 30 to 50% of their overall value. Now, that's not just being lost, it's also deferral or delay of value, which is equally bad, right? Especially as variables change and that value is impacted based on the timeline. So, get C-suite understanding how critical a disciplined strategy execution is, and actually understanding the full role of strategy execution is important. The next, which to me is fundamentally a massive issue, and why you hear so many people today talking about their role of strategy execution in bridging the gap, is that it takes a village in an organization to execute on your strategy, right? There are lots of different roles and functions that need to come together: the C-suite, strategy, operations, business architecture, the enterprise PMO or transformation office, the departmental PMO or domain PMO, product managers, program managers, IT, HR, finance, the list goes on. It is a village. And often what happens in an organization is we all optimize our processes and our slice of the pie based on the role or function that we perform. And there's nothing wrong with that. But actually, when you pull that together, when you aggregate the sum of that, what ends up happening is you end up with a fractured operating model. When these functions come together and their specific processes and tooling come together, they don't adjoin perfectly. And staying with that value analogy, value is seeping through those cracks versus establishing a cohesive operating model or operating system that is there to bring these functions together correctly to maximize and accelerate value. And last, but by no means least, and I realize I'm staying at the kind of 50,000 foot level here, I'm doing this intentionally, is, these one size fits no one methodologies, right? Every 10 years, in my experience at least, this new shiny bullet, methodology framework comes out that's going to, in essence, solve world hunger and world peace. It doesn't, right? When, I was part of a group that encouraged Ghana to create the PPM research domain, project and portfolio management, right? Very good thing to do. But for 10 years, we executed on bottom-up PPM and didn't move too far, right? Then came the agile transformation. PPM was waterfall-centric by definition, so we needed a new way to execute. And agile transformation from 2013 to 2019, or maybe even today, depending on where you're at, is the big deal, right? Again, I buy into that, right? But at the same time, this one-size-fits-all methodology around agile transformation, moving the project to product, does not fit everyone, right? So again, whether that's from the PPM side or whether that's from an architecture side, these one-size-fits-no-one solutions do not work. Why? Because to build a cohesive operating model within an organization for strategy execution, it requires unification of these functions. It requires commitment from the C-suite, and it requires the personalization of that operating model to fit the unique culture, idiosyncrasies, vertical of your organization. What works for you in one organization, say you are implementing a strategy execution framework in one organization, isn't necessarily going to work in the next for those reasons. So those to me are the sort of three big rocks, and there's many sub-reasons to those.
Brilliant. Excellent. All right. And Rebecca, I'd like to come to you and just sort of explore this from the boardroom point of view, if we can. So what does the board see? What's driving them nuts? What do they think is broken? And do you think they're right?
So first of all, one size doesn't fit all, right? Every leadership team has got their own, culture, mindset, view shed, et cetera. But I would say that, leaders don't care really about how strategy execution is done. They just don't care. They've got their heads, and as Ben said, maybe they're at the 100,000 foot level. They're thinking setting course. They're thinking visibility, what they're saying, how they look. So it's really incumbent on the strategy execution, whoever that is, PMO, whatever you call it, to get the attention of leaders in the way they're going to hear what they care about to enable the shift that's needed. That means that person has to be able to see what's happening and be able to translate to what their leaders care about. Now, obviously, Ben's talking a lot about value. And what leader wouldn't care about that? That makes sense. But there are other things that they care about as well, right? Risk to their strategy, what they're saying is going to happen. There's also the idea of drift, right? Leaders have, they don't have the attention span for those details and for often how long it takes to implement. So how do you keep them interested in what's happening? Not by telling them all the progress reports and this and that. They're going to want to hear, are we making headway toward what they're looking for, or what is preventing us from getting there? So to me, a lot of it is how we're communicating, how if we really understand what our leadership is caring about. And if you don't have a seat at the table, which we talk about all the time, you're going to have to get that information in a different way, right? It's not going to come to you directly.
So let me just kind of emphasize one of the things that you just said there, Rebecca. So, what we wanted to get some practical tips out today. And so here's the first one is what Rebecca just said about their language, not endless status reports, all that kind of good stuff. So I'm the CEO of a small company, right? I'm not even CEO of a big company. I'm CEO of a small company. And we've got an initiative running right now, which is building a technology-based capability that I believe is going to transform the business or fail completely. It's going to do one of those two things, right? And so we have a weekly session where I get an update. And when it's time for the update, the guy steps up and he starts telling me every little thing that they've done and technically how it works and why technically it's the most amazing solution. And I'll let him go for a couple of minutes and then I'll stop him and say, I only have one question I want an answer to. Is it more or less likely to succeed this week than last week? That's it. I don't want to know why or how. I want to know, are we trending in the right direction to delivering the value? Right. So tip number one, stop talking. If you're in strategy execution, stop talking about the execution part and start talking about the strategy part when you're into.
But I think you do want to know, Stuart, right? If it's trending to not working, you want to know if there's something you can do about it.
Exactly.
Is it a matter of something down here, or is there some lever that they need you to switch, whether that's a governance or authority right issue, or whether it's resources or whatever, and it needs to be crystal clear to you. This is what we need from you, and this is what it's going to buy. And that is a conversation that leaders love to have, right? It's like, can I do something? Is it going to fix it? How long is it going to take, right? So,
yeah. And Ben, you mentioned the village earlier on, right? Because there's a bunch of roles that are implied in what Rebecca just said. It's not just about delivering strategy. Yeah, so this is really important, folks, right? I'm going to paraphrase Ben's introduction. Strategy execution is not just about delivering projects. It's about delivering the strategy. And that includes business as usual and all kinds of other things as well. And to make that happen, you've got a bunch of people who need to be involved. So Ben, let's just dig a little bit deeper into what some of the, who are some of those key players who are involved in strategy execution? Because in this community, people can be a little bit blinkered, right? Which is natural.
Well, I mean, I think you only have to spend a little bit of time on LinkedIn. I've certainly spent more time on LinkedIn in the last 6 months than I've had in my entire life to see all the different functions that are talking about strategy execution through their lens or from their vantage point, right? So, I mean, I'm not sure the C-suite are talking too much about it because I don't think they actually, going back to what I said before, as I don't think they understand what strategy execution is. So maybe the first thing we should look at doing is actually coming up, and that's what we're doing at the Strategy Execution Forum, having a clear definition in terms of what a strategy execution is that is broader than just how to execute on strategic initiatives and realize the results. So the village to me is wide, right? So obviously the C-suite are involved in that. Obviously part of this is the formulation of strategy, right? So the people in strategy that have the role of definition and formulation of strategy, right? And then from there, the bridging into that execution. So many people touch on that, right? So whether then operations, right? A lot of operations people today are wearing both the strategy and ops A lot of strategy people are now being pushed into wear the operation hat as well. As part of operations, right? And to me, a foundational building block here is business architecture, right? So that might overlap into operations. But the idea of ensuring that you're not just going to look to optimize and align the discretionary activity and spend, as in the strategic initiatives, but also ensure that the operating fabric of your business is optimized relative to the strategic direction of the business. So your target state architecture, and I'm not talking about the technical architecture, of course, I'm talking about the business architecture, which should lead the technical architecture. So your business architecture and handshake with your enterprise architecture is critical. Finance, to me, is massive, right? I mean, FP&A overlaps a lot of this, right, in terms of budgeting and forecasting. So the finance team have a role to play, and in my opinion, financial data should be the backbone and integral part of strategy execution as we look to forensically understand, where the spend is and how it aligns with the strategy. To your point, not just the discretionary activity and spend, which is relatively easy, but how the 70, 80%, in some cases 90% of the budgets, the operational activity and spend is aligned with the strategy. Now, I really believe there needs to be an enterprise function that is tasked by the C-suite, that once they understand that strategy execution is an enterprise-wide imperative, to be able to develop that muscle across the organization. So whether you call that an enterprise PMO, which I'm not necessarily in favor of, a strategy execution office, a value management office, if you want to follow PMI's latest thinking, or a transformation office, or whatever, a change management office, it doesn't really matter. But they should be the architects of that strategy execution muscle across the organization, and understand that this is a multidisciplinary problem, right? And the problem is bringing these functions together that are already there, right? We're not talking about net new investment organization. They're already there working together, right? So as we come down, HR is critically important, right? How many times do we see incentive models and commitment models, slightly 2 degrees off course in terms of the overall strategic intent of the business? That should be wholesale aligned. IT, of course, but I'm not going to get into IT. And as we come down to the frontline worker, obviously we've got the departmental PMOs that are responsible for both the strategic execution, or the portfolio management and project execution of their specific portfolios, all the way down to product program managers. So it's a network of people. It is a broad village, right? But it's just a matter of building a cohesive operating model that brings them all together to ensure that strategic intent can be executed upon.
So Laura's asked a question. Laura, we're gonna use your question to bridge into the next part of the discussion. But before we do, I want to just take the temperature of the room for a second. So if you can all go to the React button in Zoom and pick one of those little images that reflects your comfort level with everything that Ben just said, because Ben was throwing out terms like business architecture and just loads of stuff that was flowing around there. Lots of business speak, not a lot of project speak. So just jump into the reactions button, the React button on Zoom. And yeah, there we go. There's the first honest one. Was a couple of horrified faces. Oh, we got someone who's feeling good. I like that. So a bit of a mixture. Some people kind of get it. Some people are a little bit disconnected from some of the language. So what I'd like to do, Laura asked a question about how the strategy can be outdated, which makes it really difficult to execute. And I'm going to choose to interpret that question, Laura, whether you meant it this way or not. I'm going to choose to interpret that question as the people executing the strategy are not necessarily up to date with what the latest strategy is that you're trying to execute. And so Fadi, just coming over to you, you've done a bit of work on this, and it turns out there was a lot of kind of overlap with some of Rebecca's thinking here when we were doing the preparation about how to pull out some of these themes, right? So do you want to talk about that just for a minute or two?
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. For the last 20 minutes, we were talking about symptoms, mostly about symptoms, and course, Ben and Rebecca mentioned also the structures and what the C-suites would like to see and how the structure is. Now, if we talk about the symptoms that if we analyze the symptoms by themselves, it will not bring us the core issue. We need to look at the pathology and physiology of the organization. And once we start doing that, we find that one of the biggest problems that build this gap is the very definition of strategy. Strategy within an organization means different things to different executives. Ben analyzed the village, but if you go and ask each of those people what strategy means, each of them would have different definition of strategy. So for me, the gap starts by the definition of strategy. Once we unify what strategy means to us as an organization, and then we cascade it down through this village and through the executives, that each of those executives, how they will define or not define, how to translate the strategy based on their functions, the gap has, we have a higher chance not to have this gap to start with. And then once we define the strategy, we will be able to agree, or we will be having higher chance to agree on what we need to do within this period of time. At the same thing, when we get, for example, Rebecca was saying that they go to the meeting and they don't know how to answer to the executives, simply because those people are executing the strategy had no idea what the strategy was about from the higher level. So they will be going and talking about, let's say, technical stuff, and the executives want to know the strategic stuff. Okay, so this is also the understanding what the strategy is and cascading it down to the functions will allow the PMO, those who are executing this strategy, to translate to the senior executives what they need to hear. Now, can you please repeat, just remind me what the question?
Well, actually, before we get into the themes, it was about the themes, you know, the questions to pull out the themes to get the conversation started. But before we do that, let me just, so I'm really interested. So if the audience can jump into the chat again for me, let's do another quick take temperature of the room again. And let's go from 0 to 10. So just type in a number. How well you think you understand your organization's strategy, you personally.
And Stuart, you mean the organization's overall strategy. I mean, that's the other thing. It's like everybody has a strategy all the way down. We need to make sure that we're talking at the highest level of the organization.
That's right. We need to have the higher strategy, which actually, what is the strategy of a profit organization? What is the aim of it? Is to create value for customers. So what kind of value we need to create and how to create it? This is the overall thing. However, we have to agree on that. If the CFO, if the executives of the village, right? The CFO, the CEO, the CMO, all these senior executives, if they don't agree of what value we can create and deliver to the customers, we will not be having a strategy. We will be having different strategies, each working in silos, fighting for the resources, and then eventually we will fail. And big part of the gap is because of that. We don't have understanding of the meaning of strategy, let alone building or formulating the strategy, as Ben was saying.
So Fadi, lead us into some questions. So first, just really briefly, I think the scores that I'm seeing there are higher than I was expecting. So congratulations, everyone. You're certainly a better than average group. Normally when I ask that question, you know, most people are down in the, sub 5 level. And this is PMOs. In a typical organization, 95% of employees don't understand the strategy at all. Right. That was, I forget where that figure came from, but that was a statistic that came out about 1.5 years ago. Ben, do you know where that one came from? I'm trying to remember where it was. Anyway, it doesn't matter. You've probably seen it.
I've seen similar statistics. Yeah.
And numbers like that pop out every couple of years. Someone will do a study. So you guys are already ahead of the crowd a little bit. So Fadi, for those who are maybe not quite there yet, can you perhaps provide some guidance on how to have the discussion, how to ask
Yeah,
the kind of
excellent.
questions that'll uncover some of these
Yeah.
the strategic direction?
Yeah. Now we talked about strategy, that we need to define it. We need to understand what strategy we have and cascade down. And I think one of the participants was talking about, like, okay, the strategy changes. Of course, it will change. And now we don't talk about strategic management. We talk about real-time strategic management. Because if we build a strategy and leave it static, okay, for a few weeks or a few months, it will be so static that it will be brittle and it will break down. So we need to talk about real-time strategic management. And of course, there is a way to do that. First of all, is to agree. Again, always about agreeing from these executives, agreeing on what value we need to deliver and how to deliver it and how it benefits our customers and benefits us as, if you want, shareholders, stakeholders, and the company. First of all, we need to agree to sit and having this open discussion, agree on what we need to do. And we have to leave egos outside the door. This is difficult, but usually what we do, how we do it, we bring in a facilitator to put the rules of the game, and we start discussing, hopefully without egos, on what value means to us, how we need to deliver it, and how to define the strategy. Once we agree on these things, we will be having a clarity on what's happening, and then we put the strategy down. Each takes it and cascade it down to his or her people, and then we start execution. However, when we do this cascading down, depending on the size of the company, some companies, the PMO is part of the executive team. Fine, the PMO understands. The PMO was part of the discussion, but sometimes it's not part of the discussion. So if it is part of the operation, then the operation director needs to cascade it down and translate it to the people there. Once you have this clarity and this understanding, things start moving in a more seamless way, and whatever changes happen on the executive level can go down because we agree on how to do things. It can go down, and whatever difficulties that happen at the bottom, because the PMO or those who execute understand what they need to do other than technical part, other than the technicality, whatever issues they have that they think that would affect the strategy, they will bring it up to their supervisors to discuss it on the board. This is what we call a real-time strategic thinking that always works, internally to see if what they are doing still fits the strategic intent of the organization. This is a continuous work, and it has to be done in a way that data come back and forth with a minimum amount of ego and second agenda. And I know this is difficult for large organization. It is better for small organization, but small organizations also have lack of unfortunate understanding of how things need to work.
Cool. So we got a bit of a question coming from Felipe. Great to see you, my friend. Thanks for joining us. And he was basically asking, what are some of the blind spots that PMOs can help executives fill in?
I think Fadi was just talking about a big one, which is, and this is why I'm brought in all the time, is that the leaders themselves are not aligned. They don't have a common understanding of strategy, right? So that's huge. And that's oftentimes one of the biggest ones. But I also think another big one is governance. They're not realizing that the governance is all confusing and broken so that things can't move. So I feel like and then of course, the whole thing that Ben was talking about, value and capacity and where we're putting our resources. Those seem to be the three really big ones to me.
If I may comment here, I totally agree with Rebecca. And remember when we were discussing the themes are the theme of governance and decision making is huge so that we really able to translate this strategy into applicable words, let's put it this way, into applicable processes, so that the village that Ben is talking about will be able to understand what, how many times when I talk to companies, when I do consultancies, and then when I explain to them the process, the project managers who are not involved in strategy, they would say, wow, now we understand why we are doing what we are doing. Because now they have an insight of the governance, decision-making, and strategy, and the structure, and capabilities, and resources. So these are extremely important themes through which we put the questions to understand how the company functions with or without the value creation, the governance, and capabilities and resources, so that we can build the right strategic intent that talks to the customers, to the clients, to the value creation, to the stakeholders, to the shareholders as well, and to the people who have agency within the organization.
Excellent. And Ben, I want to come back to you in a second, because a lot of the conversation for the last few minutes has been sort of very PMO centric, and I want to come back to the wider organization. But before I do, I want to just tie into some of that governance thing. So one of the challenges in strategy execution is that a lot of the people who are on the execution side of strategy execution, especially on the change and transformation side, the discretionary spend that Ben was talking about, are at heart project people. And so when they're thinking about governance, they're thinking about status reports and milestones and checkpoints and things like that, right? But when you're talking about strategy execution, actually way more important than that. You have to have that. That's hygiene factor, right? But way more important than that is the sort of, where are we putting our money discussion? How are we managing our capacity for change, right? So this is all the stuff about prioritization, capacity planning, getting HR. Ben mentioned HR earlier on, getting HR involved to make sure that you're not overloading one part of the organization with 5 change initiatives all at once, because if you do, they're going to collapse, right? So there's all of that, capacity for delivery and capacity to absorb change. Those things need to be part of that governance process as well. So Ben, just fill in some of the, do some coloring around the edges for us, and broaden it a little bit, if you would, from the PMO and some of the other organizational units.
I'll try to, but maybe just touching on governance, right? Because I like to say that governance should be like brakes on the car, right? They're there to make you go faster, not slow you down. The trouble is that whenever more of the traditional PMOs talk about governance, it gets into more of a paint by numbers discussion, right? Thou must do this, 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 and this before it can move forward. One of the things we're just doing at the Strategy Execution Forum is we just actually finalized establishing the 10 key principles you must master or you must achieve to master strategy execution. And principle 1 is about getting executive buy-in to the strategy execution being an imperative and needing to do something about it, right? And building a business case, which we can talk about. Principle 2 is about establishing an enterprise function to come up with those minimum enterprise controls to be able to orchestrate all execution across the organization. And that minimum enterprise controls is the important thing, right? And I think one of the barriers holding back a traditional PMO for fulfilling that enterprise function needs to go beyond traditional PMO activities is the fact that a lot of PMOs start task up, right? Going back to my earlier definition of PPM, when that PPM was founded as a research domain by Gartner in 2004, it was bringing together the world of portfolio management and project execution, right? I don't know what happened, but in 2004 and on, what happened was the people that were responsible for the portfolio domain exited, left, right? They went to strategic planning, they went to finance, they went wherever. The people that took over that combined discipline of PPM were the project-centric people. And whenever project-centric people get involved, they want to start bottom up, right? Want to start with the task, to the timesheet, to this, before they get to some of the stuff you just mentioned, which is the strategic alignment of all investments and capacity, whether that's discretionary or operational and discretionary, right? Same problem happened as we decided in 2012, 2013, 2014 that waterfall-based PPM was bad, agile transformation was good. It was good thinking, but when that was implemented, again, it was implemented bottom up, right? We're going to provide a wholesale different way of providing agile execution techniques to teams before we moved up and ran into the wall of portfolio management. It's one of the reasons why Gartner in 2019 decided to bifurcate PPM and turn it into two distinct and separate integrated disciplines: strategic portfolio management, which is all the stuff you just said. How do I align and optimize all investments, integrated with any flavor of execution, noting the fact that one size fits all execution techniques fit no one, and the same organization may have multiple execution techniques that suit different teams. So to me, if the PMO in its current form is going to form an enterprise function, it needs to forget about project execution and needs to understand that, yes, program execution is important, and establishing those guardrails in terms of how you're going to execute, ensuring and embracing the fact that there could be different forms of execution across the organization, but also needs to understand, as you said, that it's more than just discretionary spend, right? And how to shed a light and analyze that operational activity and spend and ensure alignment as much as the discretionary activity and spend. And to me, yes, we can talk about what are the right governance frameworks. That's fine. To me, there is not one single one. There's different ways to organize, your architecture of the organization. There's different ways to execute on the discretionary investments. But the most important thing is to build that function. So whether that's a PMO becoming an enterprise PMO or a transformation office that's taking the full responsibility for this, that understands that this is village, that the functions already exist out there that are working on their piece, and to bring them into a cohesive operating model designed to ensure that all activity and spend is optimized and aligned with strategy. And I think to do that, you need that C-suite sponsorship and buy-in to be able to champion that across the organization. So people often ask me, which C-suite member should be responsible for this? Is it the CFO? And we have a CFO in our community currently that is responsible for this. Is it the COO? Because the COO role needs to redefine. Is it the CSO? Is it the CEO? We have another community member who's the CEO is responsible for this. It doesn't really matter to me, because it could be based on the individual themselves, as long as the whole C-suite understand that this is critical, right? And they have, one of them is responsible for ensuring this is executed across the organization. Because when we talk about mastering the art and science of strategy execution, the science is whatever cohesive operating models you bring and build, or whatever frameworks du jour that are going to work for your organization. The art is the people dimension, right? And the people dimension is
agreeing on how to do it.
Yeah, is the people dimension, right? And the people that, because I sold strategic portfolio management solutions for longer than I care to remember, right? To organizations across all verticals, right? They were always bought because of the visibility, insight that they would give organizations in terms of providing better decision making. One of the things that people didn't like as soon as they implemented it was the visibility and insight that leaders now had in terms of what was going on in the organization, right? So people do not want transparency. People do not want to be held accountable at the end of the day, right? So you need to ensure that your people are aligned with what you're trying to do, not just how you execute on your strategy, but there's a commitment in the organization to break the people barriers in terms of building that cohesive operating model, or like I like to say, developing that strategy execution muscle in the organization to execute effectively, right? Because we've all run, small to medium-sized organizations, and it's hard enough to align all your people, right? When we're talking about some of the behemoths out there,
I would like to underscore Ben's comment about the human element, and it's from the C-suite on down, and that's a whole array of issues. None of this can take place if we're not seeing those issues, understanding how to deal with them, and parsing them over as though they're just something that an OCM can handle at the end of the situation. The human element is what's driving all of it, right? Right. So we've got to have high level intelligence about how to perceive what's happening and how to address it.
If I may have my 2 cents here as well on the governance, the way I usually define governance to my customers is I start with the who, the people, the person. Who is doing what when, where, how, and why. If I repeat, it is defining who is doing what, when, where, how, and why, and how to deal with emergent issues. So the first thing is a person, as Ben and Rebecca said, and that, but how this person, how this organization will deal with the what, when, where, how, and why, because why gives a dimension of why we're doing. We are talking with the human. We're not talking with machines, with robots. We're doing with the human. So this human has the right to understand why they are doing what they are doing. But at the same time, strategy is, governance is how to deal with emergent issues, because we know in terms of strategy, the realized strategy at the end of the year is not the planned strategy, by the way. We all know that. It is the combination of what is left of the planned strategy with the emergent strategy. And big part of the realized strategy is the emergent strategy that comes from the day-to-day or week-to-week issues from different aspects of the organization. So governance is also how to deal with the emergent issues that will define your, or will shape your realized strategy. So all this is part of the governance, and knowing that and putting it in place dynamically, not statically, because also governance will change as emergent things show up. So it's about building a dynamic environment for people to work and understand why they're doing what they're doing and how and when and where. This is the way I like to define governance.
Love it. Love it. And so we're gonna kind of stick with some of those themes for a second. There are a couple of questions in the background here from Aisha and Ashok. And I'm going to merge those two together, I think. So Ashok asks about benefits management, okay, and what, how do you make that work? Because that's, those benefits are central to executing your strategy. And Anisha asked about, where is the value leaking during the life cycle of projects? And I think those two are sort of different sides of the same coin, right? So Ben, do you want to talk a little bit? So to me, the whole benefits management and leakage starts with understanding the strategy and making sure that you're investing in the right projects and things in the initiatives in the first place.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk about some of that, maybe?
I can. Yeah. I mean, I think, to me, the big change and how we're going to move the needle on strategy execution is, as I said, C-suite commitment to making the change. And if there's two sides of the same coin or two bookends that they need to ensure are invested in, it is the strategy, definition, decomposition, communication across the organization to ensure all investments are aligned, and is then the measurement of the results, right? The rest of everything in between those two things is plumbing, where value is going to be leaking through the cracks in the pipes. And we can work as practitioners from the varying domains, PMO, architecture, etc., to be able to plug those leaks as we look to build that cohesive operating model with the idea to maximize and accelerate value. Yeah. So that is critical. So going back to, and again, whether my research is comprehensive or not, but going back to where I believe that value is being lost, right? Because I think that if we have that buy-in from the executive team to be able to build that cohesive governance model, right, that brings all the teams together to execute effectively, right? We can't wait for an eternity to see is value being realized, right? Because that's the problem with value realization, right? It has a tail to it. It takes a while. There are obviously going to be some leading indicator metrics that we need to focus on that transcend teams, that suggest if we're fixing those from improving that operating system or operating model, that in essence we're plugging leaks in the plumbing, right? And value is going to maximize and be accelerated. So when I started to look at this problem, and again this is research about 2 months old now, so it's going to be continue to be refined through the strategy execution forum community. We kind of distilled the value loss and deferral into two major categories: portfolio structural risk, which less is known about that, right? It's actually value that is not even really identified in the first place, and portfolio execution risk, which a lot more, especially from the traditional PMO, is known about. So when I think about portfolio structural risk, there are probably three main indicators we may want to focus on. The first we've already touched on in quite a lot of detail, which is strategic misalignment, where you could be losing as an organization anywhere around between 20 and 30% of value from your portfolio. But it's an insidious risk in the fact that you don't even know you're missing it in the first place. It's an opportunity cost. You have misaligned investments. You don't even have the right investments in the portfolio from the first place. And that is overcome simply to agree what Fadi said, right? Moving from what I call a bottom-up project or project selection technique, where you're just assessing investments against the strategy, through to deriving those investments top-down through the decomposition of strategy, the assessment of metrics for each strategy, which results in the actual investment itself, right? Yeah. Another metric that is key is redundancy.
Just to interrupt for a second, sorry. So I've just pasted a link to our prioritization guide. So if that's something that resonates with you, head over there and you can grab our project prioritization guide. This is basically the project prioritization selection process that Ben's talking about. Sorry to interrupt, Ben. Carry on.
No, the next one, which is kind of the same, could result in around between 7 and 10% of value being lost in the portfolio, not even identified, is redundancy and overlap between initiatives, right? If you do not have an enterprise function that's looking at all the investments across the organization, you've just got different teams and functions looking within silos, or you don't have an architecture team that is looking at redundancy as exists in the organization. We all know a lot about IT redundancies, a number of redundant applications. Just expand that out to the business in terms of looking at capabilities, value streams, and other things, right? Then you're going to have redundant investments. In other words, you're wasting money on two things doing the same thing, or three things doing the same thing in the organization. The next one, which I think is actually significant and there's need to drill down a lot more, is if we were able to effectively rationalize and optimize our operational budget, and and a lot is done in IT, but less is done within the sort of business operating fabric. Research is showing by having integrated business and enterprise architecture capabilities, you could save up to around 9% of your overall operational budget, right? If you were to then reallocate that spend back to innovation and growth. So in other words, you save around 9% of your operational budget and you redirect that to growth activities. You could end up with about, I think it's a 40% increase in discretionary budget, which allows you to invest more in activities that are going to drive value in the organization. So you need to shine a bright light on that operating fabric or that operating spend, right? Making sure that the capabilities, the value streams, the technology is aligned with your target state relative to your strategy. And if you can reduce that waste, you can significantly increase the value-orientated initiatives in your organization. So that is around the structural risk. I won't go too deep into the portfolio execution risk.
I'm going to add one to that, if I may, Ben, actually, and possibly bring Rebecca in to explore it a bit deeper. There's one more there, which is it's not just strategic alignment or strategic contribution, it's also resource and organizational loading. Right? If you overload people, they become much less effective and efficient at delivering change. If you overload people, you reach their capacity to absorb change, not just deliver it, right? Then they've got to absorb it and take on board the new processes and everything else. And so that capacity, Rebecca, is something that you often work quite hard with leadership teams to think about, right? And figure out how to balance that.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the whole thing about the C-suite. Everybody that Ben was talking about is in the room, right? So you've got all the different silos. That's the whole point of the C-suite. So you get them aligned, and not only in terms of their vision and what they're looking to accomplish strategy, but also do they have the resources, the capability, the capacity to make that happen? And that is something that very often isn't included in those strategy conversations, and is why it is the cause of so much of the gap and the problems lower down, because leadership just is pipe dreaming it. And that's great. We want them to think big, right? And have very big, bold ideas. That's exciting. It makes people feel, charged and passionate. But if you don't temper that with the reality, the current reality of what the capacity of the organization is, it's never going to work. Right. So we also look at a high level. I mean, this has got to be a high level strategic look at capacity. Otherwise, we bore the heck out of everybody and it's irrelevant. And they need to understand where are our strengths, where are our weaknesses, and what are we willing to invest to get the strategy that we just outlined. So that's a critical conversation that has to be had at the top. And if it's not, then the problems are going to show up in execution. Every time.
Absolutely. And so a lot of those execution leakage points, when you do the root cause analysis, it's actually the systemic portfolio problems that are driving your execution challenges. So, if you have just the simplest level, if your people are more than 80% loaded, then you have resource contention, and that causes delays, cost overruns. People start cutting corners, they make mistakes, then they've got to spend time fixing the mistakes, and before you know it, you're in a death spiral, right?
If I may add something here, not only that, Stuart, because this what Rebecca is saying is part of what the solution that I provide is that, okay, it's not only about only the overload. Sometimes when we build a strategy, we need to arrive at an objective, but sometimes we don't have the resources. We don't have the resources. Not about having less resources. We don't have the resources to arrive or to reach or to get this objective. And this is where the discussion that Rebecca said has to be happening on the high level to see, do we have actually the resources, the competencies, the capabilities, the assets that allow us not only to deliver the strategy, but to arrive into the objective that we thought we would want to have?
That's exactly right. And that if they really want the strategy, do they understand then that there's an investment in time to build that capacity? And that is a very critical leadership decision that sets everything up.
I agree with you. It is not only build, it is either build or acquire or integrate.
Well, yeah.
Well,
however,
So
each asset has to have different strategy on how to acquire it or how to bring it in.
How to build it. Yeah. How to make it.
So as moderator, I'm going to make an executive decision here. We've got 5 minutes left, and I'd like to spend that last 5 minutes. There are a lot of people on this call are not in a position to be in the room when these conversations are happening, right? Because the traditional model is, leadership team, the strategy team get together, they put together a list of initiatives, throw them over the wall to execution and say, execute that. And then when it doesn't get executed, they blame the execution engine, right? And so we call this thing, that's the strategy execution gap, if you like. So if you're not working iteratively, where you've got the integrated operating model that Ben was talking about earlier, where you've got the strategy formulation plugged into the execution team who are giving feedback about deliverability and capacity, right? If you don't have that and you don't currently have a discussion going with a leadership team, how do you begin that discussion? Anybody want to pick that one up?
Well, I
3 minutes.
It's one of the things that we're focused on the strategy execution forum, right?
Awesome.
It's how to build to me, the kind of tagline for the forum is elevating strategy execution to be a C-suite imperative, right? Because I think if we elevate it to be an imperative and every C-suite understands they need to develop that muscle, then good things are going to happen, because this problem has never been addressed top down. It's always been addressed kind of bottom up or laterally within an organization. So the first thing is, again, goes back to the forensic look at value, right? It's okay saying, look, as a PMO, we should be focused on value, but what does that really mean, right? That's just putting potentially lipstick on a pig, right? Just giving it a rebranding exercise. No, go and understand where are those leading indicators for value loss in the organization, and then try and translate it into the actual value being, at risk within an organization. I would also say go and collaborate with the other members of the village within your organization, because I can guarantee you that people based on their vantage point, like business architects, are saying that because we need to optimize the business architecture, right, to be able to execute on a strategy. There's a lot of architects out there saying that the critical linchpin between strategy execution is the business architecture. And I agree with that to some extent, right? I think it's a foundational piece, right? But go and have these conversations, create your village right? Connect your village, right? Of all the people in the engine room in the organization, the plumbers that are going to be looking to fix the leaks or plug those leaks as you go through, and work with them to develop that business case. So you're all going to the C-suite with an aligned message. If we were to bring these people together, which is our engine room of the organization, right? Then we can achieve A, B, C, D, versus everyone running there saying the PMO should have a seat at the table. It's all about business architecture. We need a change management office because it's all about people and culture. Yes, yes, and yes. But let's get the sum of all is greater than all the parts. Bring that together, build a business case geared to us showing where the value is at risk, that it cannot be written off as a cost of doing business. It's not 5-10% because program execution isn't a perfect science. It is anywhere between 30 and 50% for these reasons. We must proactively invest as an organization in developing this, not reactively invest. We always reactively invest. That's why EPMOs exist some of the time. That's why transformation office exists some of the time, because we're reacting to a problem versus proactively building something to be able to maximize and accelerate business value. So I think that bringing that village together in the organization, coming up with a collective pitch stroke business case to the C-suite that says we must be doing this because this is the value that's at risk. And if we do this, this, and this, which isn't going to be, it doesn't mean go out to a big four and get a very expensive proposition to reactively fix the problem. It means internally understanding how we're going to build that operating model, right, to personalize that strategy execution framework to the idiosyncrasies of this organization. But start
I
with.
just want to add, though, that what your question, Stuart, is very contextually driven, right? Ben, what you've just outlined is when you've got a large organization and lots of people involved, that's excellent. But I've also worked with organizations that had a very discrete, issue, and they could just still have to create that business case. And what we mean by that is you speak in the language that the C-suite understands and cares about. That's really what we're talking about. And you can use your direct C-suite rep to bring it up. So that in the sense is building a sponsor for it. So there's a bunch of different ways that you can go about this that are, I think, very specific to the given organization.
Fabulous. So I want to finish with Aisha's comment, because I think it's really an interesting comment. So what she says is, conversation is really telling. Even in this discussion, there is so much focus on strategy versus execution. Is there a shift we all need to make to give the execution model the same amount of time? And my take on that, so I'm going to give you each 10 seconds to answer that. So my take on that is that the execution side of it is actually really reasonably well understood, right? Go read something on benefits management. I put a paste to a link of an ebook that a little book that I have written. There we go. There it is. Little book. You can get an ebook version of it by following that link. That's reasonably well understood. Most of the challenges, most of the leakage in execution is actually caused upstream. It's caused in that gap. And that's why the thought leaders spend all their time there, because that's the root cause of the problems in execution. So you can go and take paracetamol all day long to cure your headache, or you can figure out what's wrong and what's causing the headache and go and fix that, right? So that's why we spend so much time. Ben?
Well, yeah, I hope the takeaway is, and we spend a lot of time talking about strategy, definition, and formulation. I think that is pretty good today, right? It's the translation of strategic intent into cohesive execution in the organization where the problem is, right? So there are a lot of McKinsey, Bain level decks that have been dropped on the C-suite's desk with the best strategy in the world, right? But if you can't pick that up and execute it, and this is as much of a strategic discussion as it is a block and tackle tactical discussion, right? So I think strategy execution, how do you define that, right? Strategy is vague, execution as a word is vague, right? But if you turn strategy into translating strategic intent into precise execution across the organization to maximize and accelerate business value, you have something. So, we've had this debate within the Strategy Execution Forum in the last couple of weeks, right? Yes, formulation and definition needs to be there because it's part of the village, but this is not what we're talking about. We're talking about the translation of that strategic intent across every member of that village in the organization, right?
Yeah, and again, I think that's the translation bit is another way of saying that gap that we're talking about. So Fadi.
Yeah.
You get your 10 seconds. 10 seconds seems to be more
Yeah,
like a minute, so go for it.
the correct strategy is the strategy that has also execution plan that fits the culture. Now, you can really brilliantly execute a bad strategy. Bad strategies are always executed brilliantly, but the good strategy is the one that has the execution mechanism that comes with it, that tells you what you need to do, when, where, how, by the resources, capabilities, competencies, assets that you have. You can definitely execute brilliantly a bad strategy. This is the wrong thing. Have the good strategy with the execution plan.
Awesome. Rebecca, saving the best till last.
I would say if you're at the PMO level, the biggest job is to elevate your thinking and your mindset and your language to a more of an enterprise view. And as Ben suggested, get with colleagues, build that if you don't have it. If you do have it, sharpen it to the context and the people that you're working with. Because coming from the PMO execution level, we know that is just not going to be appealing to the C-suite.
Awesome. What a great way to end. Thank you. So I want to thank the speakers, obviously. So a big round of applause for the speakers, please. Hit that react button and thank them for their time. We've got some real brains and some real experience on today's session. So thank you all for agreeing to be on the panel. Oh, look at that. Oh, I love that. Fantastic. And thank you to everybody who took an hour of your time to come and join the session. I don't know about the other guys, but the reason that I do this is because I want the world to be a better place. And all of that leakage we've been talking about today, that's not helping us, right? So we all volunteer time at not just on webinars, but at conferences and everything else to try and help more and more people bridge the gap. So thank you for making your investments. Thank you, everybody, and see you all next time.